No one expected sparks to fly when Leonardo DiCaprio sat down with Jimmy Kimmel. What was meant to be a friendly interview turned into a confrontation that left the audience stunned and the cameras still rolling. Hollywood's golden boy, known for his environmental crusades and polished persona, clashed head-on with one of late-night television's most provocative hosts. What began as a typical segment spiraled into something far more personal and public. The tension built, the stakes rose, and by the end, the entire studio was left in disbelief. Like and subscribe for more. It all started with a smirk. As Leonardo DiCaprio walked onto the stage, the applause was deafening. He smiled, waved, adjusted. His collar, cool, collected, effortless. Jimmy Kimmel stood up to greet him, leaning in for a hug, but there was a flicker in his eye. Was it mischief? Disdain? Maybe just curiosity? From the start, something was off. The energy in the room buzzed not with excitement, but anticipation, as if everyone sensed they were about to witness something unusual. Jimmy opened with a joke about DiCaprio's latest film, lightly poking at its 3-hour runtime and 2 emotions. The crowd chuckled. DiCaprio smirked again but said nothing. He shifted in his chair. And that was the first sign. What was it about DiCaprio that drew both admiration and irritation? Was it his activism, his wealth, his refusal to play the typical Hollywood game? Jimmy's next line hit harder. So tell me, Leo, did you fly commercial to the climate summit, or just send a private jet for your conscience? The room went silent. For a beat, DiCaprio said nothing. Then he leaned forward. You want to talk about hypocrisy, Jimmy? Let's talk about what you promote during commercials. Fast food, SUVs, streaming platforms that burn server farms day and night. You want to go there? The audience murmured. Some laughed nervously. Others glanced at the producers off stage. This wasn't the plan. But Kimmel didn't back down. I'm not the one telling the world to change while living in a mansion with a yacht on standby. And I'm not the one who hides behind punchlines to dodge accountability, DiCaprio fired back. Why was this getting so personal? Why did it seem like Kimmel was waiting for this moment? Was there a grudge the public didn't know about? Had something been brewing behind the scenes, an off-camera slight, or an ideological divide that could no longer be buried beneath studio lights? Kimmel pressed forward, veering into dangerous territory. People are tired of Hollywood lectures. You sit there and tell people in Middle America how to live, but when's the last time you lived a day like them? The crowd shifted. This wasn't late-night banter anymore. This was a confrontation between two powerful men, neither of whom were willing to concede the ground beneath them. DiCaprio's jaw tightened. His hands folded slowly, deliberately, as if containing something beneath the surface. Middle America, DiCaprio said quietly. I've seen what oil does to those communities. I've sat with families whose kids have asthma from the refineries you joke about. I don't need a pickup truck and a frozen pizza to earn my voice. The audience was split. Some applauded. Others looked around, unsure whether they were witnessing entertainment or escalation. And then came the turning point. Kimmel took out a printed tabloid article from under his desk. Pre-planned, calculated. You talk about oil companies like you're a saint. But didn't you just take a photo with the CEO of one last month? DiCaprio's eyes narrowed. Are we really doing this? You tell me, Kimmel snapped. Or are you only interested in the truth when it fits your script? The crowd gasped. What was happening? Was this ambush journalism, a stunt for ratings, or something deeper, an ideological battle over the future of celebrity influence and the boundaries of authenticity? The temperature dropped in the room. DiCaprio slowly stood up, and for the first time, Kimmel leaned back, uncertain. There was a chill in the air, one that cameras couldn't soften and laughter couldn't erase. and the next words out of DiCaprio's mouth would change everything. "You don't get to question my integrity without looking in the mirror first." Leonardo DiCaprio's voice was calm, but the conviction behind it hit like a slap across the face. He didn't raise his tone. He didn't shout. But his words landed with more weight than any monologue he had ever delivered on screen. The room, still holding its collective breath from the last exchange, seemed to shrink with tension. Jimmy Kimmel blinked, caught between defiance and disbelief. "I'm just asking questions," he muttered. "No," DiCaprio countered. "You're pretending to ask questions while feeding the audience a narrative you rehearsed long before I walked in here." That was the moment the atmosphere turned. Electric. Cameras kept rolling, but this wasn't entertainment anymore. It was exposure. The mask of late-night humor had slipped, and behind it stood two men no longer playing roles, but defending identities. Producers in the wings exchanged looks. Earpieces crackled. One assistant director mouthed to cut to commercial, but the main producer shook his head. Not yet. This was too raw, too real, and too revealing. "Let's be honest, Jimmy," DiCaprio said, taking a slow step forward. "You've built a career taking jabs at others. Politicians, celebrities, the average American. And somehow, you always dodge the mirror. Always the commentator, never the participant." "Because I don't pretend to be a savior," Kimmel snapped. "I'm a comedian." DiCaprio nodded. "And that's your shield, your excuse. But the moment someone pushes back, you throw your hands up and say it's all a joke. So tell me, when did holding people accountable become so funny to you?" The audience didn't clap. They didn't laugh. They didn't know what to do. And that silence said more than any applause could. But Jimmy wasn't done. His pride had been pierced, his authority challenged. So he fired back with a bitterness that no camera could soften. "You want to talk? Shields? You stand on red carpets, lecture the world about carbon emissions, and then get chauffeured to parties on yachts owned by billionaires you pretend to despise. That's not leadership, that's performance." DiCaprio's expression didn't flinch. He walked back to his seat and sat down, slowly, deliberately, owning the stage, now not as a guest, but as a man defending something deeper than ego. "You think I don't struggle with contradictions?" he asked. "You think I'm not aware of the optics, the backlash, the impossibility of fighting a system you still live inside? But I would rather fight and fall short than stand on the sidelines throwing punches with a grin." Something shifted. The crowd, stunned into silence moments ago, began to murmur again, but now with a different energy. There was no script here, no promotional tour talking points. Just a raw public excavation of character and conflict. But Jimmy still had his pride. And pride doesn't retreat easily. "You came here to promote a movie, Leo, not lecture me." "I came here," DiCaprio replied, "to talk about what matters. But if you're afraid of that, maybe you should ask yourself why." The tensions had reached a fever pitch. You could feel it in the way Kimmel gripped the edge of his desk, in the way DiCaprio's eyes locked forward, unwavering, in the studio lights that suddenly seemed a little too bright. And then Kimmel stood up. The audience gasped again, but not from what was said, rather what was about to happen. There was something in Jimmy's posture, something decisive, final. He reached for his cue card stack, slammed it face down on the desk, and pointed toward the offstage exit. "You know what?" he said coldly. "If you want to deliver sermons, go back to the Oscars. This isn't your soapbox." DiCaprio rose from his chair. "You're right," he said. "This is your studio, your stage, and maybe that's why so little truth ever makes it past the punchlines." Without waiting for permission, he turned and walked toward the exit. The silence he left behind wasn't empty. It was heavy, filled with the weight of confrontation, ego, and something deeper neither man wanted to admit. But before he reached the curtain, Kimmel added one last line. "Don't come back." And that sealed it. Not just a clash of personalities, but a breaking point between two worlds: celebrity and cynicism, activism and apathy, performance and principle. The question now was, who had truly lost control? Backstage, the energy was chaos wrapped in whispers. Leonardo DiCaprio stepped through the curtain without acknowledging the frantic crew that tried to intercept him. Makeup artists froze mid-sentence. Assistants pressed headsets tighter against their ears, trying to make sense of the commotion. One intern stood slack-jawed near the hallway, clutching a clipboard with tonight's rundown. Now irrelevant. DiCaprio kept walking. No storming, no shouting. Just a steady pace, one foot after the other, like a man who had just said what he needed to say and knew there would be consequences. He paused only once, to glance at a monitor that was still showing Jimmy Kimmel sitting at his desk, silent, caught between rage and uncertainty. The live audience hadn't moved either. The show hadn't gone to commercial. It was as if the confrontation had cast a spell over the entire set, freezing everyone in its aftermath. Back on stage, Kimmel finally broke the stillness. "Well, that was Leonardo DiCaprio, ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying a sharp edge. "Apparently, we're doing TED Talks now instead of interviews." A few audience members laughed, but most didn't. They weren't sure if they were supposed to. One producer stepped in to feed Kimmel a line through his earpiece, trying to bring the show back to something resembling normal. But the magic was gone. The illusion had cracked, and Jimmy knew it. Meanwhile, in the green room hallway, DiCaprio reached for his phone. A call came through. It was his publicist. "What the hell just happened?" Her voice barked through the speaker. "What needed to happen?" he replied flatly, then hung up. The fallout had begun. Within minutes, clips from the confrontation were already leaking online. A backstage staffer had filmed the entire exchange from behind the curtain and posted it without a second thought. It was raw, unedited, and exactly what the internet thrives on. Leonardo DiCaprio calls out. Kimmel live on air. Kimmel snaps. Throws. DiCaprio offset. Hollywood's war. Truth or ego? The headlines exploded like fireworks across every social media platform. Twitter, TikTok, YouTube. Each was a battlefield of opinions. Some hailed DiCaprio as a hero, finally challenging the smirking hypocrisy of late-night culture. Others praised Kimmel for standing up to celebrity sanctimony. But no one could look away. Back in his dressing room, DiCaprio sat in silence. Was it worth it? He didn't ask the question out loud, but it lingered in the stillness. He had known this was coming for a while now. The tension had been building, not just with Kimmel, but with the entire late-night ecosystem that reduced serious issues into punchlines and clapped like trained seals when celebrities stayed in their lane. But what happens when someone like DiCaprio refuses the lane? When they walk onto the stage, not to promote a character but to challenge the script itself? His assistant knocked once and stepped in. Gina from the Climate Fund called. She said you just made more of a statement in 7 minutes than the last 3 summits combined. Leo smiled, just barely. Not because he was proud, but because he finally felt unshackled. But not everyone saw it that way. Later that night, Jimmy Kimmel convened with his writers. The mood was tense. Not a single joke had landed since DiCaprio walked off. The applause sign flashing above the stage had been all but ignored by the crowd. And Jimmy, pacing in his office, knew something deeper had cracked. He was used to controlling the room, controlling the narrative. Tonight he had lost both. Tomorrow, one producer said carefully, we do damage control. Maybe a follow-up monologue. Say he overreacted, that it was just jokes. But Kimmel wasn't listening. He stared out, the window, jaw set. No, he muttered. We double down. His ego had taken a hit, and for men like Kimmel, Ego never bleeds quietly. Meanwhile, DiCaprio's clip had already hit 5 million views. Not from his team, not from a publicist, from someone in the crowd who sensed the moment was bigger than television. It had become a cultural spark, a collision between comedy and conscience, between speaking truth and staying likable. And in the center of it all stood a man who had spent decades mastering the art of pretending, now finally speaking without a script. By morning, the entire media landscape was ablaze. Cable networks ran the footage on a loop. DiCaprio's quiet defiance had morphed into a national flashpoint. Morning anchors leaned over glossy desks, asking whether the actor had overstepped, whether Kimmel had overreacted, and, more subtly, whether any of it had really mattered. But the public knew better. This wasn't just another celebrity clash. It was a referendum on truth in a world that preferred performance. DiCaprio, for his part, had gone silent. No tweets, no statements, no interviews. His team urged him to clarify, to soften the tone, to bridge the moment with some humanity. But he refused. Not out of stubbornness, but because doing so would undo the very point he made. Sometimes silence is louder than an apology. Meanwhile, Jimmy Kimmel returned to his stage with a sharpened blade disguised as a smirk. He opened the show with a monologue, not about the news or a trending headline, but about DiCaprio. "Well, folks," he said, looking straight into the camera, "I learned last night that Leonardo DiCaprio is now the official spokesperson for moral outrage, brought to you by yachts and designer suits. He came on my show, forgot his lines, and tried to lecture me about comedy, climate, and courage. So here's a punchline for you. Try that speech on a fishing boat and see if anyone applauds." Laughter echoed. But it was thinner now, almost forced. The audience wasn't sure if they were in on the joke anymore, or if they were the joke. Jimmy's team watched nervously from the wings. The showrunner leaned toward the director and whispered, "This isn't helping. He's digging in." But Kimmel kept going. He played a doctored montage mocking DiCaprio's past speeches. He layered in canned applause and sarcastic quotes from tabloid magazines. It was all meant to paint DiCaprio as sanctimonious, detached, and fragile. But the audience wasn't laughing the way they used to. Something had shifted. And then came the twist. A previously unaired clip surfaced. Shot by an unknown staffer. On Kimmel's production team, it captured the backstage conversation between Jimmy and his head writer, just moments after DiCaprio had exited the stage. "I should have let him finish," Jimmy muttered in the clip, eyes unfocused. "He wasn't wrong. I just didn't want to be the target." It wasn't supposed to be public, but it was, and the internet devoured it. Now the narrative turned. The man who had spent the last 24 hours trying to mock DiCaprio had, in private, admitted the actor had struck a nerve. This wasn't about hurt feelings. It was about fear. The fear of being exposed as part of the machine that rewards cynicism while punishing sincerity. The reaction was immediate. Celebrities who had remained quiet began to weigh in. Some criticized DiCaprio for stepping out of bounds, but others praised him for finally cutting through the noise. A few, like Joaquin Phoenix and Frances McDormand, openly defended him. "You don't have to like Leo," Phoenix tweeted, "but you should respect someone who says what everyone else is too scared to say." Backstage, Kimmel was furious. Not just at the leak, but at the betrayal. The mirror had been turned on him, and this time there was no hiding behind a desk or a laugh track. He called an emergency meeting with his production team. "We kill this story," he said. "We go hard. Call in every favor we have. Get the press to run with the diva angle." But it was already too late. By the end of the day, DiCaprio had been invited to speak at 3 global forums, on climate, on media transparency, and on celebrity activism. He declined all of them. Instead, he posted a single video. Just him. No studio, no lights, no production. He sat in front of a wooden bookshelf, a soft window glow behind him. "Last night I was told to stick to the script," he began. "I was told to play the game, laugh at the jokes, and sell a product. I chose not to. The video went viral within minutes, not because it was flashy or controversial, but because it was real. A man, stripped of Hollywood polish, talking like someone who had finally found the courage to stop pretending. And in that moment, Jimmy Kimmel, for the first time in a long time, didn't have a punchline, because there wasn't one. The punchline had always been the silence of those who knew better and chose to say nothing. Until now. As the dust began to settle, a strange calm descended over Hollywood. But underneath that calm was tension, coiled and waiting. The world had seen something rare, a moment unscripted, a confrontation unfiltered, and the repercussions had begun to ripple far beyond late-night television. Producers, once content to recycle sound bites and manufactured charm, began to question their approach. Publicists warned clients to steer clear of certain interviews. Talk show hosts across the board held meetings about tone, about control, about what happens when the guest decides not to play along. And Jimmy Kimmel? He had changed too, though not in the way his team had hoped. Instead of softening, he hardened. Determined to salvage his image, he booked a week's worth of high-profile guests, big names, safe choices, actors who knew the drill and wouldn't dare veer from it. But the energy was off. Every smile seemed a little too rehearsed. Every joke hung in the air just a little too long before the applause sign blinked. Viewership dipped. Audiences weren't tuning in for comfort anymore. They were searching for friction, for vulnerability, for someone who would speak without a mask. And for many, DiCaprio had become the face of that shift. But DiCaprio hadn't asked for a movement. He hadn't wanted a war. He simply refused to lie. 1 week after the confrontation, a charity gala was held in Los Angeles, attended by both DiCaprio and several of Kimmel's Hollywood allies. Cameras hovered over every step, waiting for a new flashpoint. But when the two men came face to face, something unexpected happened. Kimmel, who had clearly rehearsed an entire speech for the encounter, froze. DiCaprio didn't say a word. He just looked him in the eye and nodded once, calm, clear, unmoved. That single gesture landed harder than any monologue. Later that evening, DiCaprio took the stage. Not to act, not to perform, but to introduce a new environmental initiative. He spoke plainly, like a man without handlers, thanking the crowd not for applause, but for their attention. And when he stepped down, the ovation wasn't explosive. It was sustained, respectful, earned, because the people in that room and the millions watching from their homes understood something now. They understood that there was power in breaking script, that there was meaning in confronting comfort, and that sometimes the most impactful moments are the ones least designed to impress. Jimmy Kimmel, meanwhile, returned home and watched the replay of the gala alone. He had no jokes left, no writers to polish his reactions, just the image of a man who had challenged him, not out of spite, but out of principle. And he realized, with a slow and reluctant clarity, that DiCaprio hadn't tried to humiliate him. He had tried to wake him up, but pride is a heavy curtain to lift. In the weeks that followed, DiCaprio stepped out of the spotlight. He turned down interviews, refused offers from networks looking to tell his side. He didn't need to. The footage spoke for itself, and more importantly, so did the silence that followed. Because after the laughter died down, after the clips stopped circulating, after the hashtags faded, what remained was the echo of a question. What if more people told the truth, even when the room wasn't ready for it? In that question lived a shift, quiet but irreversible. Viewers were watching differently now, listening more carefully. They weren't satisfied with rehearsed charm and clever banter. They wanted substance. They wanted conviction. And Jimmy Kimmel? He eventually addressed the moment one last time, weeks later, in a monologue far less biting than the rest. "Maybe I was wrong," he said with a half-smile. "Maybe it's not just a show anymore." The crowd clapped politely. But somewhere, off-stage, a new script was being written. One where truth was no longer taboo, and where speaking from the heart, no matter how uncomfortable, had become the bravest role of all. No punchline, no applause sign, just the sound of people finally listening.